Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to NTU, and also welcome to the Did You Know Monthly Talk series. I shared with the audience earlier that this is a monthly talk series that happens every last Friday evening. So there is something that you can look forward to next month as well as the following month. So every last Friday evening of the month, there will be a different topic. So today, our topic is on unmasking the invisible threat of diabetes. Anybody came for a different talk? Okay, good. You're all at the right place. Good. So we would definitely be very happy to hear your feedback. So I like to ask for your help that before you leave, please fill up the yellow survey forms on the left on your seats so that we can actually get some ideas from you as well. So without further ado, but before I will invite the speaker, Prof. Yusuf Ali. So let me invite Professor James Best, who is the Dean of the School of Medicine, to say a few words. Prof, please.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you all very much for coming. Very warm welcome to everyone. And I get to say a few words because Prof Yusuf is in the part of the medical school, one of our outstanding scientists in the medical school. So I'm just going to say a few words quickly to tell you about Singapore's newest medical school, LKC Medicine. Now, as you can see here, it's a joint medical school between NTU and Imperial College London. But we're not an offshore medical school of Imperial. We're very much part of NTU, and we work totally as part of NTU. But we have, as the president, Professor Bertil Anderson, likes to say, the best of the East combining with the best of the West. And we also operate in Singapore across two campuses. On the left here, and you can see the dot, is where we are now in West Geelong. That building is our fantastic experimental medicine building, which is just over in that direction, and it links us with the School of Biological Sciences and then all of the engineering schools and the rest of NTU. So we're very much part of this campus, but we also have another major site in Novena, and that's our beautiful old heritage building where our headquarters are, which was originally medical students' quarters for students studying at Tan Tock Seng Hospital. And so we are right near Tan Tock Seng Hospital, and that's our 20-storey clinical sciences building. Now, we are so new that we haven't even been opened yet. But next Monday, Deputy PM Teo is going to not only open our new clinical sciences building, but actually open the medical school. And that's a good thing because the next slide shows our medical students, and next year, end of July next year, we will graduate our first group of medical students, new doctors for Singapore. So as a medical school, I always start with our medical students because if we don't have medical students, we're not a medical school. And our mission is to equip doctors who advance the science and the practice of medicine for the good of humanity. Our line is we want to make the kind of doctors you and I would like to have caring for us and for our families. And our vision is to redefine medicine and transform healthcare. And there are two ways that we're going to redefine medicine and transform healthcare in Singapore, and hopefully with an influence beyond the shores of Singapore, but with a firm focus on improving healthcare in Singapore and the health of all Singaporeans. Firstly, we're going to do that by producing outstanding doctors for Singapore. Our students are going to do this. The second way is on the third and last slide. We're going to do it through research because advances in medicine only come from medical research. So any world-class medical school, particularly if it has two world-class universities as its parents, and Professor Anderson would be very upset if I didn't mention that in the latest world rankings, called the QS rankings, NTU is number 11 in the world. Not 11 in Asia, 11 in the world. First in Asia. Pretty amazing. Imperial was number 8, but they had a head start. NTU is only about 26 years old, and they're 100 years old. So we have pretty amazing parents, and as a medical school, we need to be doing world-class research, and we are. And we're going to tell you about some of that tonight. So just a few examples of the areas of research. We've chosen areas of research that particularly that match the strengths of National Healthcare Group, which is our major clinical partner. They run Kutek Puat Hospital as well as Tan Tock Seng. They run Institute for Mental Health, National Skin Centre, and they will run Woodlands Hospital when that's developed in the north. And they have outstanding polyclinics. National Healthcare Group polyclinics are outstanding. So, starting on the left, Professor George Chandy joined us from University of California, Irvine, and works in the area of infectious. He leads our infectious diseases team. The National Centre for Infectious Diseases is right next to our medical school in Novena. Professor Balázs Gulyás joined us from Karolinska Institute in Sweden. He works, you might call the area of brain and mind, which is mental health, neuroscience, neurology. Professor Helen Smith came from the UK and was Singapore, the first time Singapore has had a full professor of family medicine, because Singapore needs more family doctors, and we want to inspire some of our students to take up careers in family medicine. Sanjay Chotamal, we brought him back to Singapore after 18 years in Ireland. He's the only Singaporean I know I've met yet with an Irish accent, but he is an outstanding researcher in the area of lung disease, and that's a very important area for Singapore, and a significant problem with health with both asthma and chronic lung infections. But tonight, we're here to talk about diabetes, and this is a major area of interest for us and also for National Healthcare Group. So tonight, going to hear from Professor Yusuf Ali, who I think you're going to introduce Yusuf, right? So I'll just say again that Yusuf is one of our outstanding researchers, spent time at the Karolinska Institute as well, and has returned to Singapore, and we're delighted to have him as one of our outstanding researchers with LKC Medicine. We're also delighted to have here tonight with us I think you call you Dr. Daniel, actually. Dr. Daniel Chu from National Healthcare Group in Tan Tock Seng Hospital. He's the Director of Endocrinology and Diabetes, and he's head of the Diabetes Clinic. Also we have Professor Ting Seng Kyong, who, from the continuing education section, recently appointed continuing education section, and I'm going to moderate the panel with our speaker, Yusuf Ali, and our two other panel members. Okay, enough from me.
Okay, thank you, Professor Best. So, okay. So since Professor Best has already done my introductions for me, so without further ado, let's launch right in and invite Prof. Yusuf Ali. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you, James, for that very, very kind introduction. So you know James is my boss. So if you're not happy with what I say later, you can bring it up with James. I'm sure he would love to hear some of these things. And of course, my mentor here, which I learned a lot from as well, which is Dr. Daniel Chu. And I'm sure all of us will benefit later from having them on the panel. So before I start, can I maybe have a show of hands here? How many of you here are in the healthcare industry? Or from the healthcare industry, or going to be part of the healthcare industry? Okay, very few. So that's good. How many of you are past 65 years old? Okay, I will explain to you why that's also important. How many of you had watched PM's National Day Rally? Wow. Yeah, I don't need to give the lecture anymore. No. I think he probably did a better job than I did at explaining to you diabetes. But today, in the next half an hour or so, what I'll do is I'll go through with you some of the points about diabetes. I have this, right? War against diabetes. You know, the Minister of Health announced this, right, some time ago, I think 1.5 years ago. And I think part of the reason why PM raised this in his National Day rally was because there's a real sense on the ground that people are still not understanding the gravity of the situation, right? So part of my job here in the first half is to make you really scared of diabetes, okay? If I don't do that, it means I have not done my job, okay? And of course, part of the research that we do, and I'll touch upon that in the later half of my slides, is about how we try to unmask its invisible threat. Because as you know, PM in his National Day message did say that diabetes is an invisible disease, right? So I'll touch on that. Why is diabetes invisible? And what are the things that we can do research-wise to try and make sure that we can diagnose diabetes far earlier, at an earlier stage, before some of us will get into trouble. Okay? So I will cover these 4 topics, and you will see them. So if you get lost in my presentation, just look at the upper right-hand side, and you know what theme I'm talking about, okay? So I'm going to cover why is diabetes a concern in Singapore. Why is diabetes a concern, meaning why we should be afraid of diabetes. Then I will tell you about what exactly is diabetes, and why do we get diabetes, right? And then I will go into when do we get diabetes, what are the factors that contribute towards diabetes. And of course, I'm sure many of you here are interested in the last one, is how do we prevent diabetes, right? Relatively straightforward, but it requires a lot of effort, and I can tell you that in my next few slides. So now, to first scare all of you. If you're not scared, I'm scared. You know, PM spoke about this, right? In 2014, we had 440,000 diabetics in Singapore, right? National census, 440,000 diabetics. By 2030, this number is expected to rise to 670,000. Quite significant increase, almost double. And by 2050, if nothing is done about this disease, there could be a chance that there will be 1 million diabetics in Singapore. What does 1 million mean? 1 million diabetics. Can you imagine how many patients a hospital sees, right, in a year? And now you see you have 1 million diabetics. You can understand the gravity of the situation, and you can understand how that can potentially be a real strain on the healthcare system if nothing is being done about it. Okay? Right now, for every 9 people living in Singapore, 1 is diabetic. Right now. 1 is diabetic. The scary bit for me is that 3 of them are actually undiagnosed, which means they don't know. There is a chance that they could be diabetic, pre-diabetic, but they don't know about it. Right? Because diabetes, like we discussed, it can be an invisible disease. They don't know about it. So this is the scary bit here, right? The 3 that don't know about it. Among the 1 in 3 that are diabetic right now, and this is where Dr. Daniel Chu comes in, very important, 1 in 3 diabetics have very poor control, right? 1 in 3 may not seem like a very large number, right? But when you add up everything, 440,000, and you do the math, that's a significant number of patients who despite knowing that they have diabetes, are still unable to control diabetes. And I'll tell you that in the why this is a problem in my next point here. So diabetes, in terms of ranking, you know, we are obsessed with ranks. Sad to say that. I mean, we had NTU ranking, we have Singapore ranking, a lot of ranking on economies and all that. For diabetes, it's ranked number 1 in terms of the impact on your quality of life. Right? Meaning that if you have diabetes, your quality of life will be drastically impaired. Right? It's number 2. So diabetes and its complications in diabetes is number 2 on the list of mortalities. That means number of deaths. How many people die? Right? If you rank it in the number of diseases that they die from, diabetes is second highest. Okay? 50% of people with heart failure, 1 in every 2 people with heart failure are diabetics. Correct. Very good. 2/3 of people in our dialysis centers are diabetics also. Correct. Very good. And 40%, that means almost half of patients who suffered from stroke. What are they? Yeah, diabetics. Pa. You scared or not scared? I see these numbers, I'm really scared. Right? And if you're not scared, I will have one more slide to tell you that the numbers are grim. In Singapore, for some reason, one reason or another, the prevalence of diabetes in adults by age, if you go from 20 to 79, right? If you look at the world, the prevalence, the dotted line is the world population. It's down here. If you look at Western Pacific region, which is New Zealand, Australia, right, Southeast Asia, you look at that line, it's also very close to where you see in the world. So Bominkia, not so much of a problem, you kind of expect that, right? But now you look at our red line, right? And I point the arrow here because people with 65, who has age 65 and above, right? 1 in every 3 people age 65 and above have diabetes. Okay? And the one that is really concerning as well is this was an earlier census done. There should be another new census that's coming out soon, I think for 2016 or 2016, I think. The number of diabetics, especially at the younger ages, is also going up, right? You might see these numbers are quite low, 0.5 to 1%. But 0.5 to 1% is a double, you know, twice, twofold increase, right? And I dread to see what the number is from the 2016 census if they're going to do this, okay? So it's going up across the board. Its percentages are higher in males than in females, but that's not to say that the chances of females getting diabetes is lower, right? Because as you know, and you all saw PM's speech, right? What is the life expectancy of men? 80, wow, sweet, very good, all remember already. Women? Yeah, but about 84, 85, right? And out of that average life expectancy, how many years is spent in poor health for men? Yeah, about 7.5 years. And for women? For women, anyone wants to guess? Oh, you didn't listen to PM's speech, 8, too low. 10, too high. 9. 9 years. 9 years in poor health. Why are you in poor health? There are 3 main reasons, right? Given. 1 is osteoporosis, weak bones, you know, such that when you move around the house, if you knock something when you're old, right, you break a bone, you're more frail and all that. But osteoporosis, again, you know, at a young age, if you exercise regularly, you take good diet, good food containing calcium, you should be okay. Another reason is cancer, right? And cancer is a bit of a tricky one because there's many different types of cancer and there are many, many different reasons for cancer, right? It used to be that lung cancer only affects smokers. But now they're finding out that even lung cancer is affecting non-smokers. You know why? Second-hand smoke. Wow, you guys, I think you can give this lecture already. Next monthly series, I think we can invite a few of them here. Okay? And the other reason why you're not in poor health, this one you all know lah. Why? Osteoporosis, cancer, dementia. Oh, it's so sad. No, diabetes. This is the reason why we're all here today, right? Right? Number 3 reason is diabetes. That we're all in poor health. It's because of diabetes, right? And why should we be afraid of diabetes? Because if diabetes, nothing is being done, if you're diagnosed late on diabetes, if you don't know that you have diabetes, you've been living for years with diabetes not knowing about it, it can cause a lot of damage, right? I start from the head to the toe, right? Head, you know, brain, right? You can cause increased chances of stroke, ischemia, which is the blockage of the blood vessels in the brain, right? The other thing that's scary about diabetes is, yes, blindness, right? It can cause blindness, right? If I go a bit lower, heart, right? Cardiovascular disease, right? Many people, like I said earlier, with cardiovascular diseases are diabetics. There's a very strong correlation, right? I go even lower, kidneys, remember? Dialysis, it will affect your kidney function. Diabetes will affect your kidney function. For men, PM spoke about this, right? You know, something quite significant, right? Is impotence, right? It can cause impotence. And I don't know about you, but sometimes if you go to the hospitals, you see people on wheelchair without a toe, some ankle, some below the knee, some above the knee, right? And that's lower limb amputations. And you can imagine that really drastically affects the quality of life. Not only your life, but the life of your entire family, your entire support network. Okay? And I showed a picture of a beautiful hospital here. You know what hospital is this, right? The consequences are so severe that I think recently one minister remarked that if nothing is done about diabetes, they have to build one new hospital every 5 years. Just to cope with the rising number of diabetics in Singapore. Okay? So, really. So my next topic is, what is diabetes? Okay? So how many of you are afraid about diabetes already? If you were not afraid about diabetes, but you're afraid now, hey, the one never raised the hand means not afraid. Never say die. Okay, so please, I think my main message in the first few slides is diabetes is a really serious disease. I will tell you that it does not only affect obese individuals. We're seeing more and more, especially in Asians, lean individuals, normal BMI range, getting diabetes, right? So please be careful. What goes wrong in diabetes? I have a picture here, and the main organ that I want to highlight here is this organ called the pancreas, right? The pancreas largely serves 2 main functions. The first function of the pancreas is to basically help digest the food that you take in, mainly the proteins that you take in, right? That's one part of the pancreas. That's what we call the exocrine part of the pancreas, right? It secretes enzymes into your gut, right, into your intestine, helps you digest so that all these foods can be then absorbed into your system. The other part, which is really important in your pancreas, is called the endocrine system, right? And it's these little blue dots here. These little blue dots here are what we call the islets of Langerhans, right? It was discovered by this German scientist called Langerhans. And he basically saw these under a microscope doing a biopsy of a pancreas. And it is these cells in these islets here that are responsible for maintaining your blood glucose level. That the body is extremely smart, right? Because the minute you break down your food particles and all that in your intestine, one of the first things that happen is the absorption of glucose, correct? Carbohydrates into the gut. And this pancreas is strategically located because when you break down this food and you have a lot of glucose going around, there has to be a system where this glucose can then enter your cells. Is glucose good or bad? Bad. Some say good. Glucose good or bad? How many of you say bad? How many of you say good? Good, huh? So glucose is very important, okay? You cannot go away from the talk thinking that glucose is bad. Glucose is very important because without glucose, your body doesn't have energy. Right? Your muscles cannot work, all your body functions, your brain cannot work. Your brain relies quite heavily on glucose. Right? But for your cells to receive glucose, namely the cells of the muscle, the important muscles, the heart muscles and all that, for it to receive glucose, glucose goes to your cell, and normally your cell doesn't accept glucose readily unless the door is open. There is a door, there is a gate to your cells to allow glucose in, especially the cells in your muscle, in your fat, and in your liver, right? To open this door, you need the key, right? And this special group of cells, they produce the key. Do you know what that key is? Oh, very good. Insulin, huh? Yi Tao Shu, right? If I'm not wrong, in Chinese. Okay? Insulin. Insulin is the key hormone here. Without insulin, your cells cannot receive the energy it needs from glucose. So what happens to that glucose if it cannot enter the cell? Gets stuck, no? It gets stuck. It gets stuck, it stays in your blood. Traditionally, diabetes mellitus, it's a Latin name, right? For, what is it? Sweet urine, right? Last time, I don't know how they used to test it, I think by tasting. So that's why they know that your urine is sweet. Don't laugh. Decades ago, when you go to hospital, sometimes you could see ants at the toilet bowl and all that. Then you know that that person is suffering from diabetes, sweet urine. But before that glucose or that sugar enters your urine, your blood sugar goes up first, right? And because the blood cannot cope with that amount of glucose, it tries to dump it out of your body in the form of urine. If you have sweet urine, you probably already had high blood glucose for some time already in your system, okay? And the reason why you have high blood glucose is because, I'll tell you later, but a big reason has to do with this thing. So I call insulin here a key hormone, right? Hormone because it circulates throughout your body, right? It needs your blood to send it to the different places in your body. And I call it key here because it's one, it's important, and two, you must remember, it's like a key, to open the door so that your cells can get glucose, right? Without insulin, your cells cannot get glucose. Your cells that receive energy, your brain is a bit different. Your brain doesn't require insulin, right? Your brain can take in glucose on its own. But many of the key tissues, like I said, the muscle, the fat, and the liver, which are extremely important organs, right? They need insulin. So again here, how does insulin control blood sugar? This is basically what I said earlier in a cartoon form, right? As you eat a meal, as your body digests the food, once the food particles is digested and into substances that can be easily used by your cells, there has to be a system that follows it. There has to be a system that follows it that allows this glucose to then enter the cell. Okay? Insulin is one key hormone. Many of you may know also that there's a counter hormone to insulin. Do you know what the counter hormone to insulin is? Glucagon. Wow, very good. Very good. Glucagon. And glucagon is a counter hormone because when insulin works after a meal, right, to take all that glucose and store it, right, and put it in your cells where your cells need it, and put it in your fat if your fat needs it, and all that, or store it away if it's in excess. Glucagon, when you're not eating, when you're fasting, when you're sleeping, glucagon does the exact opposite. it takes in all your stores and it brings it out in the form of glucose, predominantly from the liver. Brings it out into glucose so that your body continues to get the energy that it requires to perform the basic function, right? Breathing, heart beating, and all that when you sleep, right? So that's how insulin and glucagon work. So I hope now you have a good idea of how important this hormone insulin is. Okay? So now let's have a look. Many of you know diabetes. I think many of you also know diabetes as type 1 and type 2 diabetes, right? This is something that you may have heard. In Singapore, what is the major form of diabetes? Type 1 or type 2? Oh, very good. Type 2 diabetes. What is the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Does anyone know? Yeah, very good. Wow. Madam, taking notes very diligently. Very good. So, where does it all go wrong for insulin? Okay? In type 1 diabetes largely affects younger individuals, right? Juvenile, young individuals, what we also call as autoimmune diabetes. For some reason or another, your body produces antibodies, right, that go and attack the cells that produce insulin. And where are these cells that produce insulin? Where are they at? Wow, sweet. Okay, you are listening. In the pancreas, correct? Yes. And so a consequence of that is that you don't have enough insulin. Over time, your body will be really low and in fact negative. You don't have any insulin around. And the way to treat type 1 diabetics, the only way right now is to give insulin injections, right? They have to take insulin injections in the morning, some twice a day. Now there are new formulations that may be required, and you can spread out some of these things, some of these injections for insulin. So I would classify type 1 diabetes as quite a severe case, no insulin at all. And what happens when there's no insulin? Basically the glucose stays in your blood, right? Type 2 diabetes is the one that we are all concerned about, right? And type 2 diabetes is what we call as also like an insulin-resistant causing diabetes. So what happens in type 2 diabetes is you can have insulin around, right? But remember the door and the key I was telling you about? You have the key, right, which is insulin. The key goes to the door, but for some reason or another, either the door doesn't open or the door gets stuck, It doesn't open all the way, right? It doesn't open all the way, meaning that whatever insulin is supposed to do in your cell, it doesn't do it as effectively. Okay? So in essence, what happens here is, in type 2 diabetes, is as good as these cells thinking that there is not enough insulin around. Okay? Type 2 diabetes starts off with a lot of these cells, either in your fat or in your muscle and all that, not being very responsive. The door cannot open so well. But over time, what happens is that your body actually, in the very early years, once you start to get this, your body is very smart. Your body will adapt to this change, and one of the adaptations that the body takes is that it produces more insulin, right? Because when you have now more insulin, you can basically open more doors. Even if your door is only half open, but as opposed to opening 5 doors fully or 10 doors half open, it's about the same, right? So that's what it does, okay? It increases insulin. But that only works until a certain point in time. And after that, for reason unknown yet, the pancreas stops or starts, the insulin production starts to go down, right? And then in later stage diabetes, type 2 diabetes, you find yourself in a situation pretty similar to what the type 1 diabetics face. Yeah? Okay? So you understand type 1 diabetes, quite straightforward, quite clear. Type 2 diabetes, a little bit more complicated, about key and the door not opening as well. And over time, the amount of key being produced, the insulin, the key hormone being produced, is also being affected. Okay? So now the third part of my talk. So you know now how you get diabetes, how diabetes works, insulin, how insulin is important, how glucose is important, and how when you eat a meal, taking that glucose and storing it away in all the different tissues are very important, right? Because you need insulin for that. So the third part is, when do we get diabetes? Yeah. When do we get diabetes? Any ideas? I will start off this slide with saying, I think quite simply, we actually don't know when we're going to get diabetes, right? You saw the slide I showed earlier. Diabetes type 2 is affecting younger people as well. We don't know when we're going to get diabetes. But we do know that there are several contributing factors to diabetes. Right? I'll put them all here. And you can see, right? We have, starting at position 1 o'clock, very important, this is what PM spoke about, right? Physical inactivity. You don't move your muscles, sedentary lifestyle will affect your ability for your cells to respond to insulin, right? The ability for the doors to open. If you have a lot of good physical activity, if you keep a healthy lifestyle, that doors will open better. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, right? The GD history is gestational diabetes. I didn't talk about this gestational diabetes in the interest of time. But gestational diabetes is basically some pregnant women in their pregnancy do get diabetes, small percentage, and it usually gets resolved after pregnancy. Okay? Family history of diabetes, very important. Huh? PM spoke about this, right? The genetic component in diabetes. If you have a family history of diabetes, it's very important that you take action even if you're healthy. Even if you're super healthy, keep being super healthy. Right? Stress, something we all face, right? Something we all can't run away from. It's this big contributor X. This is something that we need to be worried about. Increasing age, right? This is also another concern in Singapore because we are an aging society, right? And of course, obesity also contributes to type 2 diabetes. So knowing this, now having this full picture, you know, if you have one or more or many of the contributing factors, and now your job is to make sure you try to cancel as many of these contributing factors so that you can cancel that red spot in the middle, which is called diabetes. Okay? When do we get diabetes? This is really important. So this slide on the left-hand side shows you some of the symptoms that you have to watch out for that is quite telltale that you probably have diabetes, right? One of the strongest ones is for no rhyme or reason why you feel always very tired, right? That's one of them is diabetes. Another one is if you find yourself, especially at night, waking up very frequently to go to the toilet, right? Because diabetes, if you speak to your doctor or your consultant like Daniel Chu and you tell him, you know, I'm always very thirsty and I always pee a lot, then he'll tell you, okay, you better go get your blood test, go and fast, come back tomorrow, right? We have to check because there's a strong chance that you'll be diabetic. Okay? So these are some of the symptoms that you watch out for. Very, very important. Even if you don't have these symptoms, I will talk about this later, go get your blood sugar level checked. Right? Because your blood sugar level is like your report card. Right? Every year, at least once, you get your report card and you know that you have a good report, keep doing what you're doing. Okay? Complications of diabetes, I touched on already. And of course, when do we get diabetes? If you look at all these things about how to prevent diabetes, basically you have to do this. You have no choice. Okay? I will touch on this prevention in a later slide in more detail. Okay? Now, this is the part I want to explain to you briefly, maybe in the next minute or so, about why diabetes is an invisible disease. So if you look at the yellow line over there, the yellow line is your fasting blood glucose, right? Your yellow line fasting blood glucose should be in this unit about 106, which in your, if you use your glucose meter, in other words, in a certain concentration, it's called below 6, right? below 6 millimolar. If it's 6 and below, means you got no diabetes. If it's 6 and above, you are pre-diabetic. And if it then starts to go up here, you are diabetes. So you can see this individual, years of diabetes, 0 means when he was first diagnosed with diabetes. But you can see here, when you look at the yellow line and you find out what's happening to his body, the blue line is the insulin resistance. What's happening to the cells, the DOS? What's happening to the fat, to the muscle and all that, right? You see, as early can be 5 to 10 years before that, you already see a change. You already see a change. And the red line is the cells that produce insulin, right? In your islets, remember? In the pancreas. These cells are already changing. They're already trying to cope with this insulin resistance. So this part here is what PM refers to as the invisible disease. You don't know. You go fasting check, normal, right? But you're normal, your fasting blood glucose is normal because it could be that your body is already producing more insulin, right? To try and cope with the inability of your body to absorb glucose. So this is the part here that is really important, and this is the part here that I will explain to you later how we, my lab, and colleagues of mine in NTU are trying to address and trying to understand better. Okay? Because over here, you don't have diabetes yet. Your cells that produce insulin are not being destroyed yet. You can still do a lot to help yourself. You are still what we call in that therapeutic window, right? To do something. Once you passed here in diabetes, once you've diagnosed with diabetes, yes, with exercise and all that, you can manage it, but the minute you stop exercising and all that, you'll come back. Diabetes never leaves you, right? You can manage it, you can control it, but from the minute that you're diagnosed here, right, you've got to be very wary. It doesn't leave you. Okay? So, as you heard what the Prime Minister has said, maybe I'll just reiterate this point, that what the government and the ministry is trying to do here is trying to educate the individual and is trying to move the responsibility to the individual, which is the right move. To tell the individual, listen, first of all, understand what diabetes is about. Be afraid, be very afraid. Secondly, go for blood screening. And some of you, I'm sure, if you go to your community centers and all that, you would find that the cost of blood screening is negligible. Some CCs do it for free. They check your 3 highs, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood glucose. Free, no need to pay. Free of charge. Okay? And of course, some of them even do it at the community centers. So you don't have to go in the morning fast, wait until 11 o'clock before you see the doctor at the polyclinic. You can already do it. So it's convenient now. Right? Some also now, they're rolling out at the community level. After you get your blood results, some of you say, hey, we don't know what to do, leh. This one got number, but I don't know how to interpret. I want to see doctor again, must pay consultancy charge, right? What to do? Right? So some now have come up with certified health coaches. You bring your results to them, and the health coach will look at your results, interpret the results, and tell you, Mr. Tan, you need to do more exercise. Mr. Tan, you need to take less sugar, or you need to eat more brown rice, you need to stay healthy, and all that. And of course, this is the next step. That's very important. After you hear already, you don't go back and forget about it. You have to do something. You have to take an active approach, right, to the results that you get and the advice that you get. And you've got to lead a healthier life, right? This is individual. But research, and this is where I bring in research. Research is another very important arm in our war against diabetes, right? Because while this can alleviate all the things that you have in the short term, in the long term, you need research. You need research at many, many different levels. And here in NTU, research on diabetes is not limited to the Faculty of Medicine, the School of Medicine, the School of Biological Sciences. It's not. We have the Wee Kim Wee School of Communications. We have so many other schools, right? We have the engineering schools. All the schools are involved. And for example, the School of Communication is doing research on trying to find out, what are the nudges, what are the push factors, right? What are the right things to say to people to get people to change their lifestyle. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I tell you that, hey, Mr. Tan, you need to exercise 30 minutes a day. Right? That's quite tough. Mr. Tan says, well, I'm barely able to make ends meet. I drive a taxi for 10 hours, 11 hours every day. How you expect me, where should I find that 30 minutes? Right? I need to feed my children and all that. So there's research going on to what are the right words, action, feedback, environment, and very importantly, the use of technology, right? And how technology can improve and can help lifestyle. And the other part is where I and a lot of my other colleagues present here, my mentors here, what they do is to research on new and early diagnostics. Diagnostics mean how to tell that you are probably at risk of getting a disease at a very early stage, and therapeutics, how to treat, right? Because knowing is only half the equation, right? If you know you got diabetes, it's like, okay, I know it, but so what? But we have to know, and we also have the possibility and the chance that we need research to find ways to intervene, right? So that you don't get diabetes. So this is the research that we do, and this is how research is really, really important. Okay? The important point I want to say here is at the level of the individual, diabetes, as opposed to cancer, diabetes, you are in control. You are in control. You can do something about it. And you don't have to wait until you are pre-diabetic or until your doctor tells you that you're in trouble. If you're healthy, you can still do something about it. You keep being healthy. You have to keep that lifestyle going. Eat well, right? Most important thing is, if you want to take some food that tastes very good, very, very good, like hard to say no, cannot say no one, like char kway teow, laksa, and all these wonderful things that I love as well, do it in moderation, right? Control. And after you eat, feel so guilty that you just run the next day, almost the whole day, okay? Right? Certain things avoid. Of course, I mentioned exercise, and the very important thing is see a doctor regularly, right? And like I said, do your health screening at least once a year, right? It's very good. It's very good for you to know year by year how you're doing, right? This is like continued education. We can talk about continual education later, but this is part of continual education. At whatever age that you're at, if you are 75, young at heart, still going, no diabetes, still do that. Still keep track. Still understand, right? After all, you are only as useful as how your body is, right? If your body stops being useful, you stop being productive as well. Okay? Now, I come into the how do we prevent diabetes and how research can help. I'm a little bit running behind time. It's okay? Okay, good. I got the go ahead. So I can take my time also here. So how can research help? Okay? So I got two pictures here, right? And I say that earlier when I said diabetes, right, number 2 cause of mortality because of the complications. You don't really suffer from high blood glucose don't really kill you, but it's the complications from having high blood glucose. That is the problem, right? Heart, kidney, brain, you name it, all the different organs that you have. And complications are a result of poor glucose control. Whether you are diabetic or not, whether you are diabetes, and even if you are diabetic and you take medications regularly, on time and all that, your body is still not functioning like normal, right? When you take medications and all that, it's an induced effect, right? An artificial effect. Your medication is trying to be like your body, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same as your body. And a lot of times, like how Dr. Daniel Chu will say, many of the diabetes doctors, they are here at this end, What are they doing? What is this person doing? Yeah, fighting fires. Fighting fires means they are trying to treat your complications. They are fighting the fires. They're trying to douse the fires. They're trying to fight. But why is that fire there? What is the reason for the fire? Right? Which is what I talked about earlier, which is the cells that produce insulin, and they're not enough. That they can't really address, or that we can't really address as of now. We have drugs, yes, to boost the amount of insulin that is being produced by these cells, yes, but like I said and I explained earlier, that for some reason only works until a certain extent. Okay? So they are basically at the firefighting end. Diabetic patients on current therapies still have a 1 in 2 chance of developing complications. Right? So you still are much higher risk of developing complications, even when you sometimes follow your doctor's advice and you don't bluff your doctor. You don't tell your doctor that, oh, you've been leading a healthy lifestyle, but at the back, right, you're not quite doing that. Right? And like I explained earlier, current drugs, right, they do work. They work very effectively. All right? They are important in you, but they're not the same as our own body. Right? And we, my team at LKC Medicine, larger team over at NTU, believe, right, that a sizable number, remember the 1 in 3 undiagnosed just now that I told you about? A sizable number of patients today are within the window of having diabetes without complications, and it's these people also that we need to take care of, right, to make sure. And how we go about doing this, by not fighting at the wrong end, which is the complications end. I'm not saying that fighting at the complications end is wrong, but I'm saying that we perhaps need a change in mindset. And we have to fight now at the early end, at the starting point, and ask the fundamental question of here. What goes on here? What is the difference here? 5 to 10 years before somebody gets diabetes, when the cells in your pancreas that produce insulin are already changing, right? And the most important part is what we call this point here, this point of inflection. Inflection means it goes up, 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 produce more insulin, until one part it says, wow, say already, cannot take it already. I'm too tired. And it starts to go down, right? And we need to prevent also that part, right? That part that starts to go down. So here, diabetes in LKC Medicine, in the Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine, as well as my colleagues in NTU, our focus is basically on this. This is a typical human islet. This picture was taken from my lab. When we're studying some of these new genes that come out from the East Asian patients that we have. We're studying some of these new genes that we think are contributing towards the vulnerability and the reason why some of these insulin-producing cells starts to lose its ability to produce insulin. We're studying this. This is how your islets look like under very, very high magnification. And we are interested here in trying to preserve these cells as much as possible, and or at some point replace, right? Replace some of these cells that you have lost, because these are your natural hormones that control your blood sugar level. So we believe that if we can keep your body in a state where it's most naturally responding to the increase in glucose, you are far, far better than if you were to start taking drugs that either mimic the function of insulin or increase the production of insulin. So over here, I will talk a little bit more about the research, what we do. This is to, of course, make you understand some of the work that goes on in NTU and how my colleagues and I, we are working very, very hard at addressing this problem. Incidentally, I'm not too altruistic in my aim. I have a very strong familial history of type 2 diabetes. So in a way, I always tell my guys, and some of my research fellows also have that, right? Some scientists come, they also have diabetes, right? There's a very strong impetus because we are fighting against our own clock, right? Our clock is ticking, and a lot of the impetus comes from there. Some research stories that I want to share with you, like I said earlier, how to preserve the insulin, the key hormone that is produced in our body in East Asians. I'll tell you why East Asians. Some stories on, after that, paper-based diagnostics. Paper-based means like your dipstick test, your urine dipstick test or your pregnancy kit test. Something that is easy, and we hope to reach a stage whereby when you are 5-10 years in the invisible phase, you can just pee onto a dipstick and I can be able to tell you whether you are at risk. Your body is starting to change. If you don't do anything about it, 5 years from now, you will get diabetes, right? We're trying to move that diagnostic window. And of course, the third part, which is very important in our context also, is diet and how we can try and intervene there. Okay? So the first story that I want to tell you is a story that has been published. Oh, I should have shown you the article. Just been published. And here we show that in East Asian producing cells we have, that means these are patients, thankful enough, cadaveric donors. Your pancreas is very deeply embedded in your body. It's not so easy to get a biopsy of the pancreas. Not so easy. It can be done, but it's quite invasive, right? You've got to go deep, you've got to go through, and to take a biopsy. Okay? Can be done, but like I said, to get enough for us to do research from the islets, we now rely on the source, and we very thankfully in Singapore had some next of kin who very generously donated some of the cadaveric, the next of kin, the deaths after the person dies, they donate the tissues for research, right? And we do, and we treat those samples very seriously, and we try to extract as much information as we can. And how do we extract as much information as we can? We basically take the pancreas, and my laboratory does this. We isolate the islets. That means we remove the exocrine part, the part that produces enzymes. We just focus on the cells that produce insulin and the other hormones, all the important cells. We look at these cells at the single cell level, individual cells, single cell level, and we then try to understand what are some of the molecular differences, some of the genes, right? Your genes, how they work, some of these proteins, how they are different. And very importantly, why are we looking at East Asians? Why? Because there's very strong data now showing that East Asians and Caucasians are very different. Phenotypically, we are very different. Phenotypically meaning the manifestation of the disease, the incidence of the disease, and the chances of you getting diabetes. In Caucasians, typically it's obesity, right? That is a big contributing factor, but not so much in our population. In Indians, in Chinese, in Malays, right? Dr. Daniel Chu can tell you that he's seeing more and more leaner patients, right? Patients like me, we think very lean, but I probably have very high percentage of body fat and I'm maybe very predisposed to getting diabetes. A lot of data has been published on the Caucasian population, and some of us here at LKC really buisong, not happy, right? We want to focus on what matters to us, which is the East Asians. Because of these differences, we think that we need to understand what these differences are. And earlier I showed you some of the studies that we're doing. We have some good idea now, some key targets to try and see, because we know that these proteins are much highly expressed in the insulin-producing cells of the Chinese population as compared to a Caucasian population. And now we're trying to find out what role these proteins play, and if it's contributing towards the function, how we can intervene, how we can use certain drugs to try and stop the function of these proteins. Okay? Have I lost you there? Tiabo, can understand or not? Huh? So the protein bit, basically, our body functions largely through the proteins that we make, right? Largely 90-odd% through the proteins that we make. We are what we are because of the proteins. But our proteins, of course, is dependent on the genes that we have, and the amounts of the proteins is also dependent on certain on how actively these genes are behaving, right? The more these genes are being read, the more proteins that are being produced, and each of these proteins then have a function, right? So I mentioned proteins because, like I said, at the end of the day, a lot of these cells produces proteins. So proteins, insulin is a protein, right? Insulin is a chain of amino acids. It's a protein, and it has a function. So a lot of it, we are looking at the proteins. But I have to say that we are not only focused on the proteins, we are also focused on some of the smaller factors, some of the metabolites, some of the other things that are produced as a result of protein function. That means these proteins, enzymes are proteins. For example, how our body digests food and all that, it's all done by proteins. So proteins are basically what confers the different functions to your body. Yeah? That's different. You can ask me, I think we have a panel. I think that's a really important question to ask in the panel. I'm sure we in the panel, we can address that. So what I'm talking about here is proteins that are made by your body. When you ask about whether high protein is good or bad, it's usually ingested protein, right? Proteins that you eat. That's quite different. Okay? But please keep some of those questions for the panel. No, so when I mean East Asians, we want to cover Chinese, Indians, Malays, as much as possible. But this study was done because of our donor registry. Most of it was done in Chinese, just by the sheer, percentages in our population, right? So, but we do want to look at the different target groups, and we do also want to look at Indians and Malays. Okay? The other thing that I'm involved is as well, like I said, your pancreas is very deeply embedded in your body. Part of the frustration that I have when I want to study the cells that produce insulin is I cannot see them very easily. I cannot see, I don't know whether they are functioning well or not because I cannot see. Right? And seeing is very important, understanding is very important. And I want to see in a living system. Right? So we have developed this tool or this technology that allows us to see these cells in the body quite easily. I won't go into the details. Here, the work was made. This Diabetologia is one of the highest Anglo-Saxon publications in the diabetes field. It made it to the front cover because here it shows a technique that we've developed that allows us to see how these insulin cells develop. This is fetus, in a fetus, as it's developing, as it's growing. Okay? I think I have to speed up here. How this technology can be used. Remember, I show here a picture. This is how an islet, this is one islet. One islet, the picture in green are the blood vessels that go into the islet, right? You need blood vessels to go into the islet because, like I said, if you don't have blood nearby to carry insulin to the rest of the body, there's no use. It's not an endocrine system. And this islet here, just to give you a sense, the thickness of this islet is about the same thickness as the strand of your hair. That fine, that thick. But here we have the ability not only to look at islets, but can we play the video? Is anyone helping with playing the video, or so I just click? Maybe I need to come here. I'll show you. Not only understand what's happening, but this is blood flow. Blood flow within that islet. And we are able to study blood flow in a model system that is very close to humans. And now we want to study why, for example, we found out that some blood vessels are open, some are closed. Why is there a kind of a dynamic situation that is happening? And we want to see whether we can have drugs that target more of these blood vessels to open so that more blood gets to your islet so that they can carry more insulin to the rest of your body. Okay? I hope this works. Yeah? So this paper was just published in Cell Reports, right? Showing how we can do this in an organism that is very, very close to humans. Okay? I'll go very quickly now. We are quite behind time. The work that I do on islets, I don't do it in isolation. It's not only my group. We bring on engineers. We bring on microscope specialists. We bring on different people with different expertise. And everyone is now working together, hand in hand, to try and understand more about what goes wrong in this special group of cells here that produce insulin and how we can basically intervene. So these are some of the projects that are being undertaken and some of the schools, right? MSc is the Material Science and Engineering School in NTU, one of the top schools in the world, right? And we are working with material scientists to develop new materials to try and see either by inducing some immunosuppression, by loading some drugs with this, or by trying to see how we can protect these islets better from some of the inflammation processes that may go on in some individuals. Okay? This maybe I won't touch on in the interest of time. This is basically to say what I was telling you about, to develop some paper-based diagnostics, to look at the very, very early changes that happen here, right? And try and see if we can then test it in humans to see who's vulnerable in getting diabetes and who's not. Okay, my apologies, but in the interest of time, I will sweep by pretty fast now. Diet. We are also interested in working with diet and diet intervention. I mean, what happens here is, you know, our staple, our main source of carbohydrate in Asia is very different from that with the Ang Mohs, right? So this is spoon and chopstick, which refers to here. We rely hugely on rice. PM has touched on this, but what I want to say here is we are trying to develop new, better drugs that target the way your body breaks down these complex sugars into simple sugars that are taken in your body, in your blood as glucose, because we want to make sure that, as you know, especially with diabetics, the main problem is that surge in glucose, right? That's why they say eating low GI food is good, brown rice is good, because the surge is not so high. But we want to now try and see whether we can develop drugs that reduce that surge in glucose. Because you know it and I know it, at the end of the day, no matter how healthy brown rice is, I still don't like to eat it, right? I still prefer white rice, right? So the whole idea is, hopefully in the near future, we have a spoonful of some of these things before we eat our rice, and it's as good or perhaps even more effective than eating brown rice, right? And that's the idea. And diabetes research in Singapore, right? NTU, LKC Medicine, Tan Tock Seng is a very, very big player for research, but we're not the only players. As you can see, I have to give fair amount of acknowledgement to other groups in Singapore who is working as hard as I am, as hard as we are, to try and tackle this disease, this very nasty disease, on many, many different fronts, right? As you can see, all the different hospitals, all the different research that they are doing, right? Including this one is your the eye center, right? And the big push is the Singapore Eye Research Institute about blindness and how they can lower the rates of blindness in diabetics. Okay, so I have to thank some people in my lab for their continued hard work. I would like to thank my mentors present here today. And last but not least, thank you to each and every one of you for listening to me ramble on for the last 1 hour. Like I said, you can forget about everything else that I said, but don't forget one thing. Diabetes is a very, very dangerous disease, and that we should be very afraid of diabetes. Okay, with that, I thank you. 谢谢.
Thank you, Prof. Yusuf Ali. Come, a big round of applause for his insightful speech. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will go on to the panel discussion. So this is where the moment comes where you throw all your questions at the panel. So may I invite the panelists, maybe the panelists like Prof. Daniel Chew, Prof. Yusuf Ali, please join in, Prof. James Best, and also Professor Ting Seng Keong. So May I just remind you that I do have some student helpers who will be going around with the mics, so cordless mics. So please feel free to raise your hands. They will walk to you and pass you the mic, and then you ask your question. All right, so without further ado, can I just invite questions? Any of you? We had some questions earlier. Okay, so maybe before that,
Maybe we get each of them.
Okay, so maybe I can hand the time over to Prof. James Best, the moderator.
Okay, Yusuf, thank you. Fantastic. Covered pretty much all you need to know about diabetes and a bit more. But I'm sure there are some questions. In fact, we have heard two, and I thought we might start with those two. The first one was about the sugar content of drinks and about limiting the sugar level. So, Dr. Daniel, going to ask you, we're going to give Prof. Yusuf a rest, going to ask you, Dr. Daniel, about, should there be a limit on the amount of sugar in drinks, and will that help to reduce diabetes?
Hello. Yeah, I'm Daniel. I think the answer to that should be yes. I personally don't actually try my best not to take sweet drinks. I mean, the reason for why sweet drinks are so harmful is because it really gets absorbed by your body very, very quickly, and that is a real strain to your the pancreas and the beta cells that Yusuf has mentioned. Personally, I've done experiments on myself. I put on this sensor, right, that measures my glucose every 5 minutes. Every minute, actually. Every minute it gives me a reading. And then I try the different foods. And so sweet drinks are the worst because it's almost an immediate effect. Your body absorbs the glucose immediately. And then it goes on to things like porridge. So you think that porridge in our Asian diet is something that we associate with, when we're ill and then we think it's healthy. Yes, so it does have a purpose. It's very easy to digest. When you're ill, especially, is very comforting and stuff. But again, it causes that very high sugar spike, right? And that high sugar spike is very difficult for our pancreas to cope with. Yeah.
So reducing the amount of sugar in drinks is a good idea, right?
Not just in drinks, actually. I mean, drinks is the very obvious source of refined sugar. Even fruits, actually. So there are a lot of fruits that we take that people would say is natural sugars, but there's no difference between natural sugars and actually artificial sugar. Most of our sugar actually comes from fruits. Sugar cane is a source. Corn sugar is a source of sugar, which is in a way a natural source.
Yeah. So I've got a sort of follow-up question to that. If you want to have sweet drink, we should pick a very small can, right? Very small pour. You see in America these giant drinks, giant soft drinks. We need smaller portions, right? As well as lower concentration, we need smaller portions of drinks.
So you just take it infrequently, small amounts.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's amazing. Sometimes I take just about a quarter of a cup of Coke, and then I fill it up with water, and it's amazing. It's still sweet at the end of it, So, but my wife thinks that I'm crazy because I'm spoiling the drink. Yeah.
Or if you're going to have a soft drink, a sweetened drink, share it around. Don't drink it all yourself. Okay. Now the other question was also about diet, and that was: is high protein good or bad? That's you again, Dr. Daniel. You haven't done enough work yet.
It really depends what you mean by high protein, I guess. So I think protein is a very important part of our diet. So if you go by the present recommendation, if you have a plate of food, you would have about half of it as vegetables and fiber. You would have a quarter of it as carbohydrates, and preferably complex carbohydrates. I know Yusuf doesn't like to eat brown rice, but I should encourage him more than, because the brown rice is not just about the calories, but it's how the carbohydrates are contained within the fiber, right? And then the last part, you would have then the proteins and the nuts and the other things. So we do need a certain amount of protein in our diet to provide us with those essential amino acids and the nutrients. Yeah.
Okay, we might come back to that because I can see that there are some questions, some other questions. So please, who'd like, go ahead, please, yes.
Hi. Following from the comments that were just made, the concept of GI and GL. Well, for example, I read, I don't know how reliable the information is. Watermelon, high GI, but the glycemic load is acceptable level. What's the panel's view? Do we look at GI or do we look at GL?
Maybe my view is a little bit biased because I deal a lot with patients with diabetes, and for my patients with diabetes, the glycemic index is important because one of the two functions in the beta cells. I mean, the Yusuf in his, I think it's probably in his graph somewhere, but he didn't really elaborate on it. We have something called a first phase of insulin secretion, and then a basal phase of insulin secretion. That means that our beta cells actually form and store some insulin for an immediate ready use. And then it also in the background produces a very low level of insulin, right? Even in early diabetes, that first phase of insulin secretion is defective. So it cannot deal with that very high sugar load. It cannot deal with that very high sugar load. And that's a deliberate test that we do. You know that oral glucose tolerance test that you make you drink 75 grams of sugar, of glucose, right? So to me, I feel that they are both important, and I'm a little bit sensitized because I deal with replacing insulin and how I match insulin with carbohydrates, and so the glycemic index to me is very important.
Yeah, and you'd agree about the watermelon because that's what you were saying. We have to be careful about fruit. If it's sweet, if it tastes sweet, it has sugar in it, yeah. And so again, it's a matter of being careful about how much we eat. Small slices, small pieces, small slices.
I mean, fruits are still an important part of your source of vitamins and all this. But we would have a recommendation of about 2 to 3 portions of fruits a day. Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just now it was mentioned that diabetes stays with you for life. But then there was recently a news program where a fat young person, he was diagnosed as diabetic when he was young, about 20s. Then he was very fat. Then after that, he changed his lifestyle. He exercised, and then he changed his food. Instead of soft drinks, he take much more water now. And then it seems that he no longer exhibit diabetic symptoms. How is it possible? And it seems that it's already reversed. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how to reconcile with your the statement that is diabetes stays for life.
So that brings exercise into the equation as well, or being physically active. So maybe you might want to talk about how you mentioned exercise and being active, 30 minutes a day if we can. Do you want to say something about how that works? Why is that important?
Yeah, I think I covered that a bit, about how exercise is important because it makes sure that your muscle can respond to that insulin that comes in much better. right? So exercise and all that basically keeps that early phase, right? That door opening that I gave that analogy, that it makes that door open far easier, allowing glucose to come in much easier. I think the comment that I made about diabetes and diabetes staying was more to say that yes, you can adopt a healthy lifestyle, but as opposed to someone who doesn't have diabetes, if you were to stop having that active lifestyle, what's going to happen? There's a high chance that you would be diabetic again, right? And that's what I meant, but it really never leaves you. It's the same thing sometimes, you hear about gastric bypass and about how it's extremely beneficial. It is true. It is extremely beneficial. But what follows that also is that you leading a healthy lifestyle. Because if you have a gastric bypass but you don't do anything and you keep going at it, a few years from now, it's going to surface and it's going to haunt you again. Right? So that's what I meant by that. Yeah.
So eating well and exercising is just another way of controlling. It's a way of controlling the diabetes without drugs. Yes. You still essentially have diabetes, but you're controlling it in a very healthy way without having to take the medication. Now there's some questions over here. Yep.
So PM's speech, the PM said that 6 out of 10 Indians have diabetes.
Yes.
And 5 out of 10 Malays have diabetes, then the average is 3 out of 10, which means the Chinese probably is about 2 out of 10.
Yeah, but age 65 and above.
All these are for age 65 and above?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
Can't be for all.
I see. Okay, good.
Yeah, Yusuf, you're correct. It's because the prevalence of diabetes is different for different age groups. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, but in national ranking, US ranked number 1, Singapore ranked number 2. I was wondering why India was not ranked number 2 and Malaysia, Indonesia not ranked number 3 and China ranked number 4. Why Singapore number 2? Why?
Very good. Yeah.
Did they find out why?
So I think that okay, so when PM talked about that ranking, he was referring to developed nations, right? And Singapore is a first world country. It's a developed nation, not so much India. Malaysia is getting there, right? And sometimes it's a lot of politics to whether you want to call yourself first world or not. The second thing is the ability for them to do census and for them to get an understanding of what's happening and the prevalence can be quite a challenge, right, in a country like India and all that. But the ranking is meant for developed countries.
So I have a view on this too. I think if the whole of India ate as well as the people do in Singapore, they would be number 1. Yeah. Another question just in...
Actually, I got one question that I met a diabetic. According to him, I'm not sure whether it's true or not, I met him at one of these seminars. He said that this paper-based testing for diabetes is already there. This technology is already there.
Yeah, for diabetes, but I'm talking about earlier.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about pre-diabetes. So I want to know 5-10 years before you get diabetes, so how to tell earlier.
He told me the problem is it seems to have some restriction on the import of this thing. This thing is very cheap outside Singapore, but we cannot get it in cheaply. And if you want to buy to the retailer in Singapore, it's hell expensive. It's a luxury to buy in Singapore. Okay. That's why, but unfortunately, our diabetes, according to also the Diabetes Society president, he made a paper. He said that it is the poor who are suffering more for diabetes, therefore they cannot afford such expensive medical costs.
I'm trying to guess, but he's probably referring to the strips, the test strips, the capillary blood glucose test strips. Yeah, so it is true that in Singapore the cost of the test strips is a little bit higher. I think because we keep to the major brands and we've got some quality control, But I trust that the government is working on that and is trying to get some group purchasing and trying to bring down the prices of test strips. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. If we want people to look after their diabetes well, it has to be affordable. So I'm sure the government will look at that carefully. Please. Yeah.
The question is, does aging play a part in getting diabetes? Take for example myself. When I was in the 50s, I went for my blood test regularly and I was very happy because the result is around 4 point something. So when I was in the 60s, I still go regularly to go for my blood test and the figure goes up to 5 point something. Maybe now I'm coming to 70 in 1 year's time. My last test was 5.8, you know. So I was a little bit quite scary because it seems the figure, if you go up to about 6, then there is chances that you are impaired. So I'm just a little bit worried, you know, whether aging, you know, by nature of its process, yes. In spite of my healthy lifestyle, for example, watch my diet, exercise regularly, and also the last 5 years, I have also controlled my weight from 70 to now 64.5, which my latest test a week ago. So that is a question that I want to find out.
Let me try to answer this question and give you some hope. First, you're right. The risk of getting diabetes does increase with age. I mean, there are probably some reasons for that. As we grow older, like Yusuf mentioned, the pancreas is just like any other organ in the body, becomes a little bit weaker. So even if you don't have a very strong family history of diabetes, your risk of diabetes does increase. Our physical activity as we grow older, even though we try very hard, you know, I try my best to keep myself active, but my activity level does get slower. So that again may predispose us to diabetes. However, when you develop type 2 diabetes, when you're at the age of 65, 70 years old as you are, it is a very different disease as when you develop diabetes when you're 30 years old. I have a lot of patients who see me for diabetes when they're 70, 75 years old, and they do very well on just diet treatment or very mild medications, and a lot of them never develop any complications, right? And compared to patients that I see when they had diabetes when they're 30 years old and 40 years old, diabetes for them is a very different beast. Yeah. So I think you're doing very well. Yeah.
Yeah, very well. But don't stop. Yeah. Keep going. Yeah. Keep controlling your weight. Keep being active. Very good. Yeah. Well,
you'll be fine.
I don't think diabetes will be a burden no. For you. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think as we age, we have to expect there will be some problems, but hopefully they're mild. Hopefully they're mild problems. And as Dr. Daniels said, if you develop diabetes when you're 70 or older, it's usually mild. It's usually quite easy to manage. So that's the consolation. Now I have a question near the front and then up the back. Okay.
We have been.
Should be working. Yeah.
Yes. Hello. Yeah. We have been talking about pre-diabetic stage, pre-disease stage, and how to prevent it. I'm just wondering whether things like genetic tests, like Me23, you know, you go for a test and you know that you are predisposed. And second question is also the fat. The fat around the liver and all this are making it difficult. And thirdly is how is the advocacy, how to include patients in your research. They are not your research subject. They are actively giving you their input on what's going on in their real life, rather than from the book.
Right. Okay, so we've got 3 questions. The first question is, how good at predicting whether you'll get diabetes are the genetic tests, like you can do with 23andMe? So I think, Yusuf, that you can...
Yeah. So to answer that question, I think there are other forms of diabetes here, and it falls under the subset, I think, of some of them under type 2, is what we call MODY, you know. There are certain mutations that would cause you to be diabetes. And these mutations are in genes that correspond to the function of that insulin-producing cell. Under those circumstances, you can, but those circumstances also, these patients, we call MODY patients, they usually also manifest the disease or the diabetes at a younger age as well.
And rare.
And it's rare, right? There are studies that try to link certain genes to the incidence of diabetes, right? But that just tells you that you have increased risk. Type 2 diabetes is not only solely dependent on genetics. Genetics do play a part, right? But it's also dependent on your lifestyle, on the environment, right, of what you do. So if you do a genetic test, right, and it says, for example, it says that you have some of these mutations that maybe predisposes you to diabetes, right? What do? And if you do a test and you don't have this panel of genes, and you say, oh, I'm perfectly fine, and I lead my life as I wish, what's going to happen then? Right? You can still get diabetes. So how you interpret some of these data and how you do some of these things, I think, it requires a lot more knowledge. At the end of the day, I think that as long as you look after your health, regardless of your genetic background, your genetic makeup, you should be in a much better position than otherwise.
Yeah. Now, the second part of that question was about fat in the liver. Yeah. And I thought we could broaden that to talking about fat inside the body, because you were talking about how some, particularly in this part of the world, people can get diabetes without being, particularly fat. And yep, for you, Dr. Daniel, can you talk about the difference between fat inside the body and fat on the outside of the body in terms of diabetes risk? And that includes fat in the liver.
Yeah. And I think that may be the other part of why diabetes is an invisible disease, especially in the Asians. So we know that there's different ways in which fat can be distributed in the body. It can be what we call subcutaneous fat, and that is thought to be the more harmless form of fat. Under the skin. Under the skin. So subcutaneous fat. So they used to think that is it pear-shaped?
Yes.
Yeah, pear. Women being pear-shaped, and having some of this fat under the skin in the thighs and in the buttock area is not so harmful. And then there is this what we call central obesity, where you have fat distributed around the waist, and a lot of that fat is not only on the outside but also on the inside around the organs, which we call visceral fat, right? So it has been well studied that in Asians compared to the Caucasians, we take weight gain a lot less poorly as compared to the Caucasians. So for a similar BMI, the body mass index, right? We have a lot higher proportion of visceral fat. And that's why there is this recommendation that, for a Caucasian to be classified as obese, you have a BMI of 30 and above. For them to be classified as overweight, their BMI is 25 and above. But if you wanted actually to find the equivalent amount of visceral fat, Asians at 23 and above is equivalent to a Caucasian who is 25. And when we are 27.5 and above, we should be considered obese, or that is the cutoff for action, in treating them as severely as someone that is Caucasian and 30. So a lot of our fat happens to be hidden. And so even myself, if my BMI is very close to 23, I have no doubt that I probably have a higher proportion of body visceral fat, and the fat is around the organs, the heart, and stored in the liver, and that we call fatty liver, right? And fatty liver has been shown to be a lot more harmful than we think it to be. Yeah.
And NTU and LKC Medicine, we're doing a lot of research in that area, and you referred to that a bit, Yusuf, but that's a really big area of research for us. Try and reduce fatty liver as part of the treatment for diabetes. Now, the third part of that question, if I got it right, is about people with diabetes not just being part of research studies as subjects for the study, but also informing us about what's important to them as people with diabetes. What are the areas that they want answers to? And so involving them in setting the research questions. I think you also said a little bit about that in your talk, about some of the areas that it's not just all about research in laboratories. So do you want to just answer that bit of the question?
I think I can answer this question, and maybe I will try to lead into Professor Ting, who might want to say something also about possible careers going forward, about how some jobs might be available in the future, people doing such research. So as I said earlier, that the involvement of participants, of the community, I think it's very, very important. You're absolutely right. I spoke about that when I talked about doing research at the community, trying to understand what are the words, actions, factors, what is the environment that can foster someone to exercise more, right, than someone to lead a more sedentary lifestyle. What are kind of technologies that works for elderly individuals, for example. You can't give them all the sophisticated gadgets, apps and all that and expect them to adhere to it. What are the easy ones that you could do to get them to lead a healthier lifestyle? That's one. But I have to say that at some point in time, even in my research, I would love to take participants, or not even participants, but even diabetics and all that, right, to my lab, to show them some of the research that goes on, look at islets under a microscope to get a good understanding of what these cells are, to engage them, and of course, like you very rightly said, to understand some of their concerns. Right now, we collaborate very, very closely with clinicians, right? And we rely on clinicians because clinicians are the first line, right? They see the patients, they understand the patients, and it's very important as me as a basic scientist to talk to people like Dr. Daniel Chu, who will tell me what are the issues of the day, what to focus on, and if my research questions are right or not, are relevant or not in the context of Singapore. And maybe I would say here also that in terms of work at the community and engaging people, social workers or things like that, maybe Prof. Ting might have.
But I guess that's what we're doing tonight, right? Is yes. Also meeting with people to, yep.
Currently, there are researchers who are looking into the makeup of your gut microbiome because they say that that's how they handle the metabolism. Can you comment on it?
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yes. I think we can.
It's very true. But there's a gentleman in the blue shirt up the back who's been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
Yeah, two questions. I read a book many years ago. The title of the book is Eat According to Your Blood Type. So I don't know whether there's enough research in this book from Dr. D. Much as a new naturopath therapist. I don't know. So eat according to your blood type. Supposing I'm O blood, you have certain food you avoid and certain food you... So is there any research that we can collaborate or something? And second question is family history of diabetic. My mother is diabetic. She had all the organ failure and last amputation, below knee amputation and heart attack. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed as diabetic. Last year, I have 4 stents in my heart. So I'm worried about 2 boys, my son, whether they're going to get the heredity. Where can we stop the cycle, this vicious cycle of diabetic in our family history? I would like to sort of bring my 2 boys for research so that you can extract as much blood as you want. So I want to stop this And then they say that if you married your cousin, I married my cousin, and he adds on to your chain of all that myth. And so please help me because I'm in dire need of life extension.
Can I?
Okay,
can I try?
Please. Yeah.
Just to add,
the blood type first.
No, the blood type question is too difficult for me.
By the way,
I will answer I'll try to answer the second question.
By the way, I'm following up with Prof. Chi in Tan Tock Seng Hospital. I'm working now at SLC Hospice. Daily I can see a lot.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Let me try to answer the second question. So the statistics is that if your mom has diabetes, you stand about a 30% chance of getting diabetes. When your dad has diabetes, the risk seems to be a little bit lower, but it's then again still 20%, right? If both parents have diabetes, you have a 50% chance of developing diabetes in your lifetime. However, right, we are starting to believe that not all that risk is genetics. It's more complicated than that. It may be other things like what we call epigenetics. That means that it is not just in the genes, but how that genes is affected by some environmental factors very early in life, and whether those genes then how they express themselves. Okay, so that's why you see just now in the previous slide, right, that they are very interested in gestational diabetes, in maternal health, because we believe that if you give that child, the fetus, a different environment in early development, that child's risk of developing diabetes later in life is very different, right? So it's don't lose hope. It isn't just that when your parents have diabetes. Actually, there's more that we can do than we think. Yeah, genes is not destiny. Yeah, we're beginning to understand that. I don't know how to answer your first question. So I'll pass it.
Okay. So I actually had a question for Prof. Ting, because we've been talking a lot about exercising our bodies, but we also need to exercise our minds, particularly as we get older. And, you know, diabetes, one of the complications that Prof. Yusuf didn't mention because he didn't want to scare you that much is that if you have diabetes, there is an increased risk of dementia, of Alzheimer's disease. And there's a lot of evidence now of ways that you can prevent Alzheimer's disease. And one of those ways is exercising the mind. So I wanted to ask Prof. Ting to tell us about PACE and what LKC medicine is doing to help people exercise the mind as we get older, and some hints for all of us about how we can keep our minds active. I think we know pretty well how we can keep our bodies active, but not necessarily how we can keep our minds active. So if you could help us there.
Okay. As you can see, my job is basically just to bring out what is being done in NTU in terms of all the different courses that we offer, how to make it accessible to the public. In very small size, you know, you don't have to sign up for 4 years of an undergraduate study or a few years of master's degree, but rather just come in, take short courses, or even for those who are more daring, to take a whole semester, of course. The whole idea is so that you exercise your mind. And this exercise of mind is not just taking it for the sake of taking it, but rather taking something that of interest. I think just now when you're talking about exercise, again, same thing. A mindless exercise is really something that you can do, but it's not going to be sustainable. Right? You need to do something that you actually enjoy doing. And in terms of enjoying, it's not just enjoy doing exercise, but enjoy doing learning. So my job is basically bringing that learning out to people, depending on your interest. So from PACE, we cover actually a very broad spectrum, not just engineering, but non-engineering as well. And we work with the medical side, because some people are just, I give you an example. Some are just all interested in, okay, I'm at this age now, I'm old, but I'm very interested to see how herbal medicine can help in terms of all the different symptoms I have from old age. Then you can just attend a class on it. We conduct it with both TCM by the way, right, NTU has got a TCM center. So through TCM or through LKY medicine, again, same thing. And I think just now, Yusuf Ali also mentioned jobs. you can take classes to do jobs that will help us also in terms of our research, right? Or to help people who are suffering from whatever symptoms there is. So in terms of social work, so you can see how the classes we conduct is not just engineering, but social. We need people to look at collecting surveys. Then we also conduct classes in how you conduct those surveys, how you collect them, how you analyze them. So you can see what we're doing. A very broad spectrum. I'm saying all this so that I know some of you are interested in only one area, some of you in another area, but so that you can idea that what we're doing is very broad, you choose your area. And when you come in, take the classes with us, it's not very costly. In fact, the government subsidizes a major proportion of it. Okay? But it really keeps your mind active. And keeping your mind active is actually complementary to keeping your body active.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah. That's the saying, healthy mind in a healthy body. Yeah, that's what we want. Yep. Some microphone here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to that. Go ahead.
I find sometimes there are some contradiction. For example, when people talk about diet, food. Okay, we know white rice and brown rice, for example. They have probably about, I know, okay, brown rice has a lot of minerals and vitamins. But in terms of carbohydrate, are they about the same maybe except for the surface of the brown rice? Then the other things are white sugars. Then how about some other thing? People say it is good for the body. Honey. Honey, is it also sweet? Okay, then the other things, or brown sugar. They say brown sugar is different from white sugar. So are they really different? They are all sweet. Maybe the other thing is like fruit. Fruits also add in sugar, but of course different form of sugar. So I don't know whether all these different form of sugars or of foods would have different effect on the diabetes. Thank you.
Well, I think that is
okay. Okay. I think you're right. So as mentioned by another person in the audience just now about glycemic index. So the glycemic index of brown rice may be a little bit better than white rice, but if you take the same amount, or it adds to the same glycemic load. So you will still put on weight. It is still not much better for your diabetes. So you have to control the portion. Fortunately, I think that when you take brown rice, it probably fills you up and it lasts a little bit longer. So people tend to eat less of brown rice as compared to white rice. The thing about sugars, simple sugars, right? Honey is no better than just taking sugar or brown sugar. They are all simple sugars, so they are all not suitable for people with diabetes. Yeah.
But some people say honey, honey has vitamins and other substances in it that might be beneficial to health.
Yeah.
But as far as the sweetness is concerned, it's just the same. It's sugar. Yeah. Okay. We're going to go to the gut microbiome. Do you want to say something about that? Yeah.
So over at the Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine, we do have a professor that is working on the gut microbiome, and he is developing very, very interesting models to look at where the gut is being colonized by different bacteria, percentages and all that, and how that affects overall metabolic health. So you are absolutely right. The gut microbiota is important, especially when now some of the drugs that we thought the mechanism of action is through certain organs, we're now beginning to understand that some of these microbes, are breaking down that drug in a certain way and exerting that effect. And that if you lose that particular microbe, that drug may not be as effective or some. So you are absolutely right. Microbes are incredibly important in that sense, and we do have that research on that.
Yeah. Now I was going to say one more question, but I can see two people with microphones, so we're going to have two last questions. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing, and it was very inspiring. My question is on stress. Professor Yusuf mentioned about stress is one of the contributing factors for diabetes. what is the mechanism behind? That's a scientific question. A much more social question is, what is NTU role in helping Singaporeans to reduce stress? I think you highlighted.
Okay, I'm going to answer the first part because I think I can give a quick answer. Some people eat more when they're stressed. So that would be a very easy mechanism. It's called comfort food, right? You know, when we're stressed, we go for chocolate or something that tastes good, makes us feel better. There may be other mechanisms by increasing adrenaline levels, for example, which can raise blood glucose and cortisol. But probably the main reason is that when people are stressed, they eat more. But reducing stress in Singaporeans, I'll have to go to the Singaporeans. I haven't been here long enough to qualify. No, actually, Prof Ting. Yeah. He looks like a very relaxed guy to me.
They're all very jealous of what I'm doing because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and that's exactly it. I did live a very, very stressful life. And so when I took on this job, I said this is very easy to do because this is something I want to do. Because whatever I do, it's really helping people. And like I said just now, if you do something that you love, how can it be stressful? You know?
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. I only do things that we like. And lucky last question.
Thank you so much. I would like to know the role of trans fat and how does it contribute to diabetes? Thank you.
Trans fat. So trans fat is a form of fat that's particularly dangerous, a form of saturated fat. And it's banned in a number of countries, so you're not allowed to use trans fat. I'm not sure about the status in Singapore, but it doesn't cause diabetes anymore, but it damages the arteries more than other kinds of fat. So you should, you know, if you're going to read the label on any processed food, if it says trans fat, don't buy it. It should have 0 trans fat. Okay, so I want to thank our panellists. Please join me in thanking the panellists. But also want to thank you. I've never been to a meeting where we've had so many fantastic questions and so much participation. So please give yourselves a round of applause.
Thank you, Professor Bess. And panelists, please give them one more round of applause. I think they deserve it. Okay, may I invite our Executive Director for the Local Community Engagement Office, Dr. Toh Kian Lam, to present them with the tokens of appreciation. All right. So first, Prof. Ting Seng Keong, Prof. James Bess, Professor Yusuf Ali, and Prof. Daniel Chu.